The conning tower hatch cracks open, releasing a wall of fetid air so thick it's almost visible in the pre-dawn darkness. Tykert climbs topmost, gulps clean Atlantic air, and immediately notices something wrong. His watch officer, Oberleutnant Zur C. Klaus Hartmann, is 3 rungs behind him, but the smell arrives first, not the expected mixture of diesel, sweat, and bilge water that marks every U-boat, but something far worse. Hartmann's leather U-boat jacket, standard issue regulation equipment, has been soaked in seawater, dried imperfectly, soaked again, and is now actively decomposing against his body. The tanning process, rushed in German factories operating under wartime quotas, is reversing. The chromium salts and fish oils used in the leather treatment are breaking down, and in doing so, producing hydrogen sulfide. Hartmann's jacket isn't just rotting, it's poisoning him. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was standard operating procedure, because by 1943, German U-boat crewmen were being issued equipment that could kill them almost as efficiently as Allied depth charges. The story of why German submariners feared their own clothing is not about cowardice or superstition. It's about industrial chemistry, wartime resource scarcity, bureaucratic incompetence, and the brutal mathematics of the Battle of the Atlantic, where German production shortcuts transformed regulation uniforms into toxic, flammable, and sometimes lethal liabilities. The German U-boat service, the Unterseebootswaffen, entered the Second World War as arguably the most elite branch of the Kriegsmarine. Between September 1939 and May 1945, approximately 40,900 men served in U-boats. Of these, 28,000 never returned, a casualty rate of 68.5%, the highest of any military branch in any nation during the entire war. The causes of these deaths are well documented. Depth charges accounted for approximately 42% of U-boat losses, air attack for 32%, mines for 12%, accidents and friendly fire for the remainder. What's less discussed, and what Kriegsmarine medical officers documented with increasing alarm from 1942 onward, was that German U-boat crews were experiencing elevated rates of chemical burns, respiratory illnesses, and skin infections that had no tactical cause. The common factor was their clothing. German U-boat crews were issued specialized equipment designed for the unique environment of submarine warfare. The standard kit included 1 leather U-boat jacket weighing approximately 4.2 kilograms when dry, treated with chromium-tanned leather and lined with wool or synthetic fiber, 1 set of blue-gray U-boat fatigues made from a wool synthetic blend, rubber-coated canvas foul-weather gear weighing 2.8 kilograms. Leather sea boots with composite rubber soles and the iconic white captain's cap, though this was primarily for officers. The leather jacket, known colloquially as the U-boot lederjacke, was the signature garment. Manufactured primarily by contractors in Hamburg, Kiel, and Bremen, these jackets were designed to provide water resistance, warmth, and durability in the punishing North Atlantic environment, where surface temperatures could drop to -2 degrees Celsius and wind speeds regularly exceeded 45 knots. The problem was that by late 1941, German leather supplies were critically constrained. The Wehrmacht required enormous quantities of leather for boots, an estimated 3.2 million pairs per year just for replacement stock on the Eastern Front. The Luftwaffe needed leather for flight suits, gloves, and equipment harnesses. Civilian production had been curtailed by 85% under wartime rationing. The entire German war economy was competing for the same shrinking pool of properly tanned leather, and U-boat production, despite its strategic importance, was not winning that competition. The numbers tell the story. In 1939, the average U-boat leather jacket was made from hides that had undergone a 45-day chrome tanning process using high-grade chromium sulfate and neatsfoot oil for waterproofing. By 1942, that process had been compressed to 12 days using lower-grade chromium salts, fish oils from Baltic herring, and synthetic tanning accelerants that included formaldehyde derivatives. By 1943, some contractors were delivering jackets that had undergone only 8 days of treatment. The result was leather that looked regulation but whose chemical structure was fundamentally unstable. Chrome tanning is a chemical process that transforms raw hide into leather by cross-linking collagen fibers with chromium salts, specifically chromium, Roman 3, sulfate. Properly executed, this produces leather that is water-resistant, flexible, and chemically stable. The process requires precise pH control, typically between 3.8 and 4. 2. An adequate time for the chromium ions to fully penetrate and bond with the hide structure. When rushed, incompletely tan leather retains unbound chromium compounds that remain chemically reactive. In the presence of moisture and U-boats were perpetually saturated environments, these compounds can convert to chromium, VI, hexavalent chromium, which is acutely toxic and a known carcinogen. This is what was happening inside U-456 and hundreds of other boats. The interior environment of a Type VIIC U-boat, the workhorse of the German submarine fleet with 703 boats commissioned between 1940 and 1945, was a chemical nightmare. The hull measured 67.1 meters long, 6.2 meters in beam, with an internal pressure hull diameter of just 4.7 meters. Into this space were crammed 44 men on average, though boats often sailed with up to 52 crew during extended patrols. Relative humidity inside a submerged U-boat typically exceeded 95%. Condensation formed continuously on every metal surface. The temperature ranged from 5 degrees Celsius near the outer hull to 35 degrees Celsius near the diesel engines. Carbon dioxide levels regularly reached 15% of atmosphere compared to the normal 0.4%, even with the chemical CO2 scrubbers running continuously using potassium hydroxide cartridges that themselves produced caustic dust. In this environment, the improperly tanned leather of the U-boat jackets began to fail within days of a patrol's start. The first symptom was smell. Kriegsmarine medical reports from U-boat Flotilla 7 in St. Nazaire, France, documented that by 1943, nearly 80% of returning boats reported severe malodorous conditions emanating from crew leather equipment. Chemical analysis conducted at the Naval Medical Research Institute in Kiel identified hydrogen sulfide H2S as the primary culprit. The fish oils used in the tanning process, specifically herring and sprat oils that were high in unsaturated fatty acids, were breaking down through bacterial action and hydrolysis. This produced hydrogen sulfide, the compound responsible for the smell of rotten eggs, at concentrations that in enclosed spaces reached 20-30 parts per million. At 10 ppm, hydrogen sulfide causes eye irritation. At 20 ppm, it causes respiratory inflammation. At 50 ppm, documented in several boats operating in tropical zones where temperatures exceeded 40 degrees Celsius, it causes severe respiratory distress and can trigger acute pulmonary edema. But the smell, as horrific as it was, represented only the beginning of the problem. The incomplete tanning process meant that the leather itself was reverting. Collagen fibers that hadn't been properly cross-linked with chromium were breaking down through hydrolysis, essentially rotting while still being worn. This produced a slimy, sticky surface texture that crews described as like wearing a dead fish. More dangerously, it released chromium compounds directly onto the skin. Medical examinations of U-boat crews returning from extended patrols documented contact dermatitis in 43% of personnel who wore leather jackets for more than 14 consecutive days. This wasn't mild irritation, these were chemical burns. The clinical reports describe erythematous lesions with vesicular formations on shoulders, backs, and arms, precisely corresponding to jacket contact areas. In severe cases, the skin showed ulceration and secondary bacterial infection. One report from U-123, returning from a Caribbean patrol in August 1942, documented that 11 of 16 crewmen examined had second-degree chemical burns requiring hospitalization. Now, before we get into the even more catastrophic fire risk these jackets presented, if you're finding this deep dive into the hidden technical failures of World War II useful, subscribing to the channel genuinely helps. It takes a second, costs nothing, and supports more detailed historical analysis like this one. Right back to how German procurement policy was literally setting its submariners on fire. The flammability issue emerged from a different wartime shortage: rubber. U-boat foul weather gear traditionally used natural rubber coating over canvas backing to create waterproof outer garments. By 1942, German access to natural rubber was almost completely severed. British and American control of Southeast Asian rubber plantations and the Allied blockade meant that Germany's synthetic rubber program Buna S was the only alternative. BuNa-S, a styrene-butadiene copolymer, could approximate some properties of natural rubber, but its fire resistance was dramatically inferior. Natural rubber has an auto-ignition temperature of approximately 400 degrees Celsius. BuNa-S, depending on the specific formulation and additives, ignites at temperatures as low as 260 degrees Celsius. Moreover, the plasticizers used in German BuNa-S production, primarily coal tar derivatives and chlorinated paraffins, were themselves flammable and produced toxic fumes when heated. German U-boat crews smoked. This was not recreational, it was psychological necessity. The stress of submarine warfare, the constant threat of depth charge attack, and the months-long patrols created psychological strain that military psychiatrists termed U-boat Krankheit, U-boat sickness, a combination of anxiety, depression, and nervous exhaustion. Smoking was one of the few available coping mechanisms. Each crew member received a tobacco ration of 100 cigarettes per week, and actual consumption often exceeded this through trading and barter. In the confined, oxygen-depleted atmosphere of a submerged U-boat, smoking was restricted to specific times and locations, usually after surfacing or in designated areas with adequate ventilation. But accidents happened. Cigarettes were dropped, lighters malfunctioned, and when open flame contacted the BuNa-S coated foul weather gear, the results were catastrophic. The official Kriegsmarine investigation into the loss of U-377 in January 1944 provides the most detailed documentation. U-377 was operating on the surface at night, charging batteries, approximately 180 nautical miles northwest of Cape Finisterre. A watch officer on the conning tower wearing BuNa-S foul weather gear was lighting a cigarette in a cupped hand, standard procedure to avoid showing light. The lighter, a standard Wehrmacht tissue benzene model, malfunctioned, producing a larger flame than intended. The flame contacted the sleeve of the foul weather jacket. Within 2 seconds, according to the subsequent testimony of the only survivor, the entire sleeve was burning. Within 8 seconds, flames had spread to the jacket torso. The officer, panicking and unable to remove the jacket quickly due to its tight fit and the equipment harness worn over it, fell backward down the conning tower hatch into the control room. He landed on the chart table, which was covered with paper maps and acetate plotting sheets. The burning BuNa-S coating, which liquefied as it burned and dripped like napalm, ignited the chart table. Fire spread to electrical insulation, to rubber gaskets, to the leather jackets of crew members who rushed to help. Within 45 seconds, the control room was fully involved in fire. The boat's carbon dioxide fire suppression system, which required manual activation, was never engaged. Crew were either already dead from smoke inhalation or had evacuated to other compartments. U-377 burned on the surface for approximately 12 minutes before internal explosions, likely from battery hydrogen gas igniting, caused structural failure. The boat sank in less than 30 seconds. Of the 49 crew aboard, 1 survived. U-377 was not unique. Kriegsmarine records, cross-referenced with British Admiralty assessments and post-war interrogations, indicate that at least 17 U-boats experienced serious fires between January 1943 and May 1945, with clothing or personal equipment identified as either the ignition source or a major contributor to fire spread. These numbers are almost certainly underestimates, as many boats lost to unknown causes. Approximately 90 boats in total may have succumbed to internal fires in circumstances where no survivors remained to provide testimony. The experience of U-662 operating in the Caribbean in July 1943 illustrates the medical consequences even when fire was avoided. The boat had been at sea for 42 days, operating in tropical conditions where internal temperatures regularly exceeded 38 degrees Celsius and humidity remained above 98%. The commander, Kapitänleutnant Heinz Eberhard Müller, filed a detailed medical report upon return to Lorient, France. Of his crew of 44, 37 showed symptoms of chemical exposure. 17 had contact dermatitis severe enough to require medical treatment. 6 had developed respiratory conditions consistent with chronic hydrogen sulfide exposure, presenting with persistent cough, chest pain, and reduced lung function. 3 had developed severe fungal infections, athlete's foot having spread to cover more than 30% of body surface area, a consequence of wearing leather boots that remained perpetually damp and provided ideal environments for fungal growth. Most disturbingly, 2 crewmen had developed what the medical officer described as progressive necrotic lesions on their backs and shoulders, where leather jacket contact was most continuous. Biopsies revealed tissue death consistent with prolonged hexavalent chromium exposure. Mueller's report went through proper channels. It reached U-boat Command Headquarters, the Befehlshaber der Unterseeboot, or BDU, commanded by Gross-Admiral Karl Dönitz. It was reviewed, it was filed, nothing changed. The reason was coldly bureaucratic. German U-boat construction was struggling to replace combat losses. In 1943, Allied anti-submarine warfare had achieved dramatic effectiveness. Germany commissioned 270 U-boats that year but lost 244, a net gain of only 26 boats despite massive industrial effort. Dönitz's strategy required maintaining a minimum of 300 operational boats in the Atlantic at all times to achieve his calculated tonnage targets against Allied shipping. Every delay in boat construction, every resource diverted from primary systems like torpedoes, engines, or pressure hull steel, directly impacted strategic objectives. The clothing crisis, severe as it was for individual crewmen, represented a lower priority than getting boats to sea. The mathematics were brutal, but they were also clear. Dead crewmen could be replaced, delayed U-boats could not. So the equipment continued to be issued. Some boat commanders took independent action. Several requisitioned civilian leather jackets through irregular channels, paying from personal funds or boat discretionary accounts. Others attempted field repairs, treating jackets with various oils, waxes, or commercial waterproofing compounds, almost all of which proved ineffective or made the problem worse. Lanolin treatment, attempted by the crew of U-505 in late 1943, reduced the rotting smell but increased flammability. Linseed oil treatment, tried on U-214, polymerized into a hard, brittle surface that cracked and allowed water penetration while still retaining toxic chromium compounds underneath. Some crews simply stopped wearing the leather jackets entirely, accepting the cold and wet as preferable to chemical burns and toxic exposure. This had its own consequences. Increased rates of pneumonia, bronchitis, and hypothermia, particularly during winter North Atlantic patrols where air temperatures could reach -10 degrees Celsius with wind chill factors driving apparent temperatures below -30. The contrast with Allied submarine services is instructive. Royal Navy submarine crews received leather jackets manufactured to peacetime specifications throughout the war. British leather supplies, though rationed, were never as critically constrained as German sources, partly due to Commonwealth imports from India, Australia, and Canada, and partly due to more effective industrial prioritization. British submarine leather jackets underwent minimum 30-day chrome tanning using high-grade materials, and quality control inspections rejected any items showing incomplete treatment. The result was equipment that remained functional and safe throughout extended service. American submarine crews, operating primarily in the Pacific, received a different solution. Synthetic fiber jackets and specialized foul-weather gear made from neoprene, a synthetic rubber with superior fire resistance and chemical stability compared to German Buna S. By 1943, American submarines were arguably the safest, most comfortable combat vessels of any navy, air-conditioned, spacious by submarine standards, equipped with washing machines, ice cream makers, and superior ventilation systems. The contrast with German U-boat conditions was so stark that captured German submariners frequently refused to believe American accounts of submarine habitability, assuming they were propaganda. The U-boat clothing crisis reflects a broader pattern in German wartime production, the substitution crisis. As the war progressed and Allied blockade tightened, Germany faced systematic shortages of critical materials: rubber, petroleum, chromium, nickel, tungsten, tin, copper, and dozens more. German industry responded with ersatz substitute materials, many of which were technically ingenious but practically inferior. Buna S synthetic rubber, ersatz coffee made from roasted grain and chicory, synthetic gasoline produced through the Fischer-Tropsch process from coal, paper-based textiles, wooden bearings, concrete bunkers instead of steel fortifications. The list extends across virtually every sector of the economy. Some substitutions worked adequately, many did not. The clothing issued to U-boat crews fell firmly in the second category. What makes this particularly tragic is that solutions existed. By 1944, German chemists had developed improved synthetic tanning processes using syntan compounds, synthetic tannins that could produce stable leather-like materials without chromium. These were used successfully in some applications, particularly for vehicle upholstery and industrial equipment. The technology could have been applied to U-boat clothing. It wasn't, because by 1944, the administrative and industrial infrastructure necessary to implement widespread equipment changes no longer functioned effectively. Allied bombing of German industrial centers, transportation network disruption, loss of skilled workers to military conscription, and general economic chaos meant that even good solutions often couldn't be implemented. U-boat crews continued to receive dangerous equipment not because German industry couldn't produce better, but because the systems required to deliver better had collapsed. Production statistics validate this assessment. In 1943, German industry manufactured approximately 68,000 U-boat leather jackets. Of these, post-war quality assessments estimated that fewer than 12,000 met proper tanning standards. The remainder were defective to varying degrees, from minor quality issues to actively dangerous. By 1944, production had increased to 94,000 units, but estimated quality-compliant production had dropped to fewer than 8,000 units. The percentage of acceptable equipment was declining even as absolute production increased, a clear indicator of industrial process breakdown. Meanwhile, German U-boat losses were accelerating. 242 boats lost in 1943, 241 in 1944, and 153 in the first 4 months of 1945 before the war's end. The Unterseebootwaffe was being destroyed, and its crews were fighting not only Allied navies but their own equipment. Individual testimony provides human context to these statistics. Gerhard Beidlingmayer, who served as a machinist aboard U-969 from January to March 1944, recorded in post-war interviews, "We called the leather jackets the poison. Everyone knew they were dangerous, but what could you do? Go on watch in the North Atlantic in February without a jacket? You'd be dead from cold in an hour. So you wore the poison and hoped the patrol would end before it killed you." Some guys wrapped cloth around their necks and wrists trying to keep the leather from touching skin. Some guys got burns anyway. I saw one man, Schmidt, his whole back was raw meat from the jacket. He couldn't wear it anymore, but he couldn't go without it either when he was on bridge watch. So he wore it over a towel, which got soaked immediately and probably made it worse. When we got back to base, they sent him to the hospital. I heard he never came back to boats. Lucky bastard. Heinz Schiefer, commander of U-977, one of the last U-boats to surrender in August 1945 after fleeing to Argentina, wrote in his memoir, "The equipment was a disgrace. I say this not to criticize the men who made it. They were doing their best under impossible conditions, but the system that forced such equipment on us was criminal negligence. We lost men to British depth charges and American aircraft, yes, but we also lost men to rotten leather and burning rubber, and those deaths were German-inflicted, which made them harder to bear." May 7, 1943, 3:55 hours, North Atlantic. Oberleutnant Zur See Klaus Hartmann descends back into U-456 after his watch period ends. His leather jacket, still reeking of hydrogen sulfide and chemical decay, is hung in the forward torpedo room on a hook welded to the pressure hull. It will hang there, dripping condensation, accumulating salt deposits, continuing its slow, toxic decomposition, until the next watch rotation when Hartmann will put it on again. He has no choice. The mathematics are simple: wear the poison and risk chemical burns, respiratory damage, and fire, or face North Atlantic weather unprotected and guarantee hypothermia. For German U-boat crews in 1943, this wasn't a choice, it was just another way their war was trying to kill them. The U-boat clothing crisis reveals something fundamental about industrial warfare. Victory is determined not just by courage or tactics, but by industrial capacity, resource access, and the unglamorous logistics of keeping men equipped with safe, functional gear. Germany lost the Battle of the Atlantic for many reasons. Allied code-breaking, superior radar, long-range aircraft, escort carriers, and improved depth charges all played critical roles. But underneath these tactical factors lay a deeper truth: Germany couldn't produce the basic materials required to sustain its war effort. When your submariners fear their own jackets as much as enemy weapons, when your clothing is as dangerous as the enemy's depth charges, you've already lost. The war is just taking its time catching up to the inevitable. The 28,000 German submariners who died in World War II deserve to be remembered not only for their courage, which was real, but for the system failures that sent them to war wearing poison and wrapped in flame. That's not romantic, that's not heroic. That's just what happens when industrial capacity collapses and bureaucracy prioritizes production numbers over human survival. The numbers tell the story, and the story is brutal. The story is brutal.